name is Michael William Denny, author of Path of the Thunder Wizard, Thunder Shamanism. You can go to thunderwizard.com or thundershamanism.com, or you can Google me or search for me on Amazon, Michael William Denny, and a lot of my products will come up. I've started a video series of me just talking extemporaneously about racism and racial self-hatred. And what has sparked me to do this is this controversy that's erupted with Rachel Dolezal. And I talked about her already, but in a nutshell, you know, this is a woman who has been choosing to misrepresent her racial identity. She's done amazingly good things, apparently, for the cause of racial equality. The only thing that anybody can fault her for is lying about her ethnic background. And why that's important is because I think that it represents some really important issues about racial self-hatred and, shame and the destruction that causes. So I want to talk about something on a spiritual level, and that is having to do with what is our Anglo-Saxon racial heritage. You have two choices, two extreme choices. If you want to get into, traditional Germanic spirituality or, British spirituality, whatever it is, the knee-jerk reaction, including my reaction, the knee-jerk reaction for most people of Anglo-Saxon or British descent is to adopt Celtic spirituality. And this is tough because, I think that the Druid movement, has been really amazing. There's all kinds of, I don't know anything, only from, I read Philip Carr-Gomm's book, one of his books about Druidry, and I found it amazing, and his shamanic experiences, and I found it fascinating. I'm not a Druid in that sense. I don't follow that. I tried to get into that in the late 80s and the early 90s because I was under the false impression that I was of Celtic descent. And so I tried to get into it, but I couldn't quite interface with it. And I shared about that already. But what I found is interesting is that what if you're of Germanic descent? What do you do? You have two choices? You really don't have two choices, unless you're familiar with my work, or maybe there's a couple other people out there. You really only have one choice, which is to adopt heathenism or asatru. And I'm hesitating because I really am not interested in offending anybody or putting anybody down, but I may end up stepping on some toes here. My experience was this. I didn't even realize that I was of Germanic descent until I started having shamanic visitations that when I researched them, I found out were coming from ancient pre-Christian Germanic deities, like the goddess Hulda. She reached out and contacted me. I'm getting emotional. That is not my intent. She reached out to me in visionary experiences. And it wasn't until I did the research that I found out that she was a Germanic deity. I didn't even know who she was. And that opened up a whole, all kinds of things started happening to me. And, I've written about a lot of it. But one of the first things I did was I reached out to other people who were worshiping Germanic deities, you know, who we would call Asatru or heathen. And I reached out to them thinking, because I didn't know any of this stuff was going on. It wasn't my intent at all to have this happen to me. This wasn't my intention at all. Happened completely by who knows what, the will of the gods and my own DNA. I reached out to these people and I got slammed so hard by these people who called me New Age. They called me all kinds of names. And they just wanted nothing to do with me. And then I found out something else which totally shocked me. And I suppose if I think about it now, it's not all that amazing, but there were a lot of racial connections here. That there were racialists involved. There's this whole movement called folkism, which, you know, there's all kinds of different folkish heathens, but let's be real. Folkish heathens are people who have a racial agenda. At the very least, folkish heathens are people who are exclusive and do not believe that people who are not of Germanic descent should be worshiping the Germanic gods. And then you could go on the other extreme and you have people who are absolutely hardcore white supremacist racist. And I found something other very interesting, extremely confusing. I guess it's not confusing if you analyze it. But there are people who are atheists and agnostics who are folkish heathens. And they do it for racial reasons only. I find that amazing, you know, and I, you know, when early on I got, you know, I don't get nearly as many public criticisms now because I've published a lot of books and who knows what that's done. But my first book, and I was brand new in this, I got slammed on some forum by some guy who was saying that I was dishonoring our ancestral gods, you know, and that kind of thing. And then he went on and then saying how I was, you know, misinterpreting our sacred lore and all of that. And then the same guy starts saying that he doesn't believe in the 9 worlds of the world tree. He doesn't believe they really exist. And then he's, you know, basically he's an agnostic or an atheist. And so I found it, you know, downright hypocritical of him to be saying that I'm misrepresenting or warping the traditional lore when he himself doesn't even believe what the lore teaches. So anyway, I have to be honest. I'm grateful that I didn't know that these racist heathens existed. Because if I had known, I wouldn't come close to touching it. I find racism to be so abhorrent to me. I wouldn't have touched it. I wouldn't have come anywhere near it. But the universe totally pulled me into it, and I was already in it. Mother Hulda had touched me, and there was no way for me to abandon the gods of my ancestors. I couldn't do it. And so I had only one choice. As a warrior, I had only one choice. I have to stand up to this ridiculous nonsense. And I'm in this position of having to create this new path. And thankfully, there's been a lot of people who've contacted me who've said that they're very grateful that they were also very attracted to the indigenous path of our ancestors, but were really turned off by the racist nonsense. And so I've given them an opportunity, you know, and I share a lot about it in my book, so I won't go into it here. But I also, you know, I want to get into the Celtic thing. You know, there's a lot of people, and myself included, who, when they know they're of European descent, if they know they're of Anglo-Saxon descent, of descent from anywhere in the UK, the knee-jerk reaction is to want to adopt Celtic religion. And I want to analyze why that is. One of the most beautiful and interesting literature is the Arthurian myths. And so if you follow any kind of Celtic tradition or Druidism, you're going to be very familiar with the Arthurian myths. And here again, I'm stepping on very thin ice. I have to be very careful here. But I need to share some reality. Maybe I don't need to. I'm choosing to share some reality. The Arthurian myths are not indigenous Celtic polytheist lore. They're the only lore available. There's a few Celtic myths running around, but there's really not a whole lot left. The Romans did a really good job of discarding and destroying indigenous Celtic polytheism. And I'll get into the irony of that in a little bit, but the Arthurian myths were written in France during, Christian times. And it was written under the guise of this. The French were writing and creating this false identity. And what they were looking for was they were looking for the noble savage. We all go through it. We did, during the colonization of the Americas, Europeans created this myth of the noble savage. We do it now. By the way, anytime in my belief, forgive me for hurting people's feelings, but anytime that I walk into a Native American store that has, all kinds of Native American things on it, what I see is that myth of the noble savage. White people going in there and getting dream catchers and getting this and getting their Native American whatever it is. And I know it's coming from an honest desire to connect, and I know they don't consciously see it as dismissive, but I see it as dismissive, and I see it as trophies. These are trophies of a conquered people. And we're gonna take these trophies home with us, and we take Native American art and we put it on our wall and all this kind of crap. And when I see that, I go, yeah, that's the imperial white culture saying these are the people we conquered, and weren't they cool? The noble savage. This, I know that's a generalization, so forgive me for hurting anybody's feelings. It's not my intent. That's what I see when I read the Arthurian myths. They're Christian myths. They're King Arthur, who's supposed to be this indigenous, Celtic tribal chieftain, and he's looking for Jesus's cup. You can get into all that. I won't. But it was the French version of the noble savage, and they created it out of a non-existent Celtic indigenous religion that did not exist, at least not in that form. And so let's ask a further question. Why is it that the majority of people who practice Celtic spirituality are of Germanic descent? It's because, for two reasons. Number one, there isn't any Germanic shamanic polytheist options out there. Asatru, reconstructionists, I say in quotes, are trying to do it, but in my experience, for the most part, maybe, forgive me again, this is a generalization, so it's not going to be true in all, but the most vocal of them are operating from a post-Christian dualist mindset. And, just to give you an example, I remember when I don't know, some forum, again, early on, and some Asatru guy, reconstructionist, said that he didn't like magic. He went on to volunteer. Yes, did our ancestors practice magic? Yes, they did, but I don't like it. And so how can you say you're a reconstructionist and yet completely dismiss the, he's calling it magic, the animist, shamanic practices of our ancestors. This is what I mean. So when somebody calls himself a Reconstructionist, I know that they probably don't even realize what they're saying half the time. So we've got this problem, people who aren't racist, people who really want to tap into the essential shamanic understanding, and they want to do it through their own cultural heritage. There are not a lot of options. The only options are Celtic. And in my experience, a lot of the Neo-Celtic stuff is based on the Arthurian myths, which, as I already said, are, falsely created myths in the post-Christian era, and in my opinion, do not represent indigenous Celtic religion. I don't know what the indigenous Celtic religion was, and the truth is I don't think a lot of us do. There's just not a whole lot of records left. The Christians destroyed a lot of it. And I know a lot of the Druids are going to get upset, and please don't get mad at me. I absolutely respect Druidism. I really do. I do believe that they're tapping into something that, I can't speak on because it's not, but I can feel it. I can feel that it's legitimate. I have a bigger beef with my heathen brothers and sisters who the right-wing Republican gun-toting Reconstructionist folkish heathens who I think are just completely, totally, most of the time, really complete lack of understanding of what they're reading. The point I wanted to start off is that, again, the question, why do people of Germanic descent, when they want to tap into a shamanic tradition, why do they reach out to Celtic traditions? For the same reason that those French people wrote the Arthurian myths. There is a self-hatred. A self-hatred connected to being of Germanic descent. When did this start? The self-hatred of being of Germanic descent started during the Roman conquest of Europe.